Welcome to the annual meeting of the Foster's Pond Corporation. Thank you for joining us. I'm Steve Cotton, president of the FPC. Foster's Pond is a remarkable place. It anchors a community, attracts countless visitors, and has a rich history. In the 48 years I've lived on the pond, the community has grown and evolved.
I'm gonna have to go out.
So has the Foster's Pond
Come
Corporation,
back in.
reaching out to old timers, newcomers, the next generation, and visitors. Our aim is to preserve this magnificent water body, strengthen the bond among all who are drawn to its shores. So in that spirit, let us begin. I'm going to start this evening by drawing on that rich trove of pond history to explain how a unique neighborhood around the pond came to be. Then we have a few organizational obligations to fulfill, but this will be a very short business meeting so that we can get right to our program tonight. After Katie's presentation, I'll bring you up to date on what we accomplished last year and hope to get done this year. And we'll also have our usual open forum for new business, wildlife sightings, questions, and comments. Katie will answer questions at the end of her presentation. If we have to move on before we've gotten to all your questions, Katie has agreed to stay on and take more questions during that last item on the agenda. That's when I'll take questions as well. For either of us, use the chat function to ask questions. Our Vice President, Marty Rabinowitz, will monitor the chat. Everyone has been muted to reduce background noise, but during that last part of the agenda, Marty will unmute anyone who wants to be heard for a question, comment, or new business. We are recording the meeting and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. So here's our beloved flying duck. If you don't see the image immediately, the dam is the tip of the beak, Rock Island is its eye, the channel is the net, and so on. The pond was named for Andrew Foster, the 22nd man to settle in Andover. He lived near its shore, but of course that was before the dam was built. The pond was smaller, occupying just a portion of what is now the main pond. Andrew, by the way, died at the age of 106. Now, I could spend the entire evening recounting the startlingly recent and disjointed history of the 254 acres of protected conservation land around the pond, all those color-coded areas on this map. The Goldsmith family led the way, taking steps in the 1960s to protect their 270-acre woodlands permanently, then sealing the deal with Bessie's bequest in 1974. The next piece to be protected was the 23-acre Wilkinson Reservation, donated to Avis by Irv and Marshall Wilkinson in 1981. The town made its first conservation acquisition around the pond in 1990. I'm going to hone in on another unique feature of the pond neighborhood, the profusion of oddly shaped, mostly undersized lots on 6 one-lane private roads surrounding the entire western half of Foster's Pond, both sides of the duck's head and neck, and both sides of its left wing. Those 6 private roads, or private ways as they are described in legal documents, are highlighted in red on this map. Andover has other private ways, of course, but 6 of them in one neighborhood serving so many houses, there's nothing quite like it elsewhere in town as far as I know, and it didn't just happen. It strikes me as remarkable that there's only one subdivision, Morningside Drive, actually touching the pond. Think about how many subdivisions mushroomed within a stone's throw of the pond. Hawk Ridge, Rulston Circle, Mill Dam Estates, Dundas Avenue, Olympic Village, Spruce Farm, to name just the closest. Now, we all know, of course, that those quirky lots on those private ways were at some point summer camps, but how did that come about? And how did we get from rude camps on undersized lots to modern houses on what were, until recently, all dirt roads? Aren't there rules about that? If you look at Foster's Pond from the air in 1960, you can see just how undeveloped the whole area was. That large bare patch off the right shoulder of the duck is a gravel mine, supplying gravel to construct routes 93 and 495, which were not yet fully built. And by the way, that's a pig farm on what today is Mill Dam Estates with rather elegant houses on Powers Road and Carter Lane. Through the 1960s, you could leave your food scraps out in a metal bucket like we put out our recycling today, except that the bucket fit into a hole with a sturdy ground level metal cover, and the so-called slops would be picked up to feed the pigs. I found the in-ground bucket at the end of my driveway when I moved here in 1973. The pig farm was still going strong. Things didn't look much different in 1965. The pig farm's doing fine. Dug Pond doesn't exist, but with routes 93 and 495 both having been recently opened, major development is coming to Andover. Construction has just begun on the Morningside Drive subdivision in that gravel pit above the duck's right wing. The Morningside Drive subdivision plan showed 54 lots, 4 cul-de-sacs, and wide streets. The houses and their manicured lawns would be spread across 68 of the 76 acres that local developers John McGee and John McGee Jr. had recently acquired. They would advertise for buyers in the Boston Sunday Herald. And while it didn't show on these plans, they would shortly begin dredging the old mill reservoir to fill holes left over from the prior gravel mine. They also planned to create a bathing beach and a 50-boat marina for residents of the subdivision. Bessie Goldsmith, then in her 80s, led the charge to curtail the dredging and block the marina. She rallied local community opposition, persuaded the select board to oppose further dredging, and cajoled the state to step in. But not before the mill reservoir would be substantially altered and Dug Pond created. I'll show you that in a bit, but the lesson here is that developers in that era had a long leash to alter the landscape. Let's go back to those 6 private ways on the western half of Foster's Pond. Something very different would evolve there. No wide streets, fewer lawns, and a distinct lack of uniformity in house designs. The uniqueness of the community which then existed and that would transform in a very different way can be laid at the feet of 2 characters. One, who died in 1950, was Francis Homer Foster, a direct descendant of Andrew Foster. The other character is a 5-member volunteer board that most residents never have occasion to encounter, the Zoning Board of Appeals. Let's start with Francis, or I should say Homer, since that's how he would introduce himself. Born in 1867, about 10 years after the Foster's Pond Dam was built, Homer was just 13 years old when he and his 15-year-old sister Sarah inherited hundreds of acres of land in Andover, Wilmington, and Tewksbury, including 170 acres to the west of Foster's Pond along both sides of the stream leading out of the much smaller pond. That's pretty much the entire area that would later be traversed by those 6 private ways. The inheritance did not include the dam. That belonged to a consortium of mill owners in Ballardvale, Smith and Dove, the Stevens Company, and Ballardvale Mills, who had built it to store water to be released each summer when the Shawshene River was running low. Now, for quite a while, Homer and Sarah didn't do much with their inherited land. Meanwhile, the land itself took on a new look as the pond gradually grew in size. In 1898, 4 decades after the dam was built, Homer, who was then 31, and Sarah sold a parcel from their joint inheritance, the island that today we call Rock Island. Almost immediately, the owner put up a modest house on it. No, not this one. This is Homer's house at 98 Central Street, also built in 1898 or 1901, depending on whose website you believe. Homer himself was apparently never interested in living on the pond. It had taken decades after the pre-Civil War dam was built for the pond to grow from its 50-acre natural state to something like today's 125-acre flying duck. By the early 1900s, the pond was inspiring postcards of its lovely unspoiled vistas. One of them, a view from the dam, shows that very first house that was built on Rock Island. Maybe it was these postcards or the pond's pristine beauty that they celebrated, which inspired Homer to think about taking on stewardship of the pond as his personal project. But it would take him a while to get around to it. In 1913, Essex County conducted its first inspection of the then 66-year-old Foster's Pond Dam and informed the mill owners that it was leaking badly. Its wooden spillway, wrote the inspector, was all going to pieces. Under the spillway were wooden doors that could be opened to send water downstream to the mills. They were also rotting. But the whole idea had been absurd from the start, since when the Shawshene River was low, so was Foster's Pond, and there wasn't much water to send precisely when it was most needed. Faced with the news that their useless dam was disintegrating, the mill owners had good reason to dispose of it. But for Homer, to protect the singular feature of his waterfront property, the dam was essential. In 1915, Sarah and Homer bought the dam, and Homer, who had become a civil engineer, had the dam repaired. Here's the original 1913 inspection report. Then we see in 1916, the inspector has returned for a follow-up inspection and added a note on the same sheet. The rotten wood had been replaced by concrete, and the dam's new owner, who had done the repairs, has introduced himself. Homer Foster. Sarah and Homer, when they jointly held the land, sold off only a couple of parcels on the pond. But in 1923, we see records of a full-blown plan for campsites on Foster's Pond. The plan was clearly Homer's idea. Sarah didn't even live in Andover, and in 1925, she deeded over her entire interest in the Foster's Pond land to her brother. From that moment on, Homer was for all practical purposes, the lord of all he surveyed from the dam. And survey he did. His plan and future plans he developed carved up the property into the oddly shaped jigsaw pieces we see today. For 2.5 decades, Francis Homer Foster controlled the destiny of most of the shoreline of Foster's Pond. Between 1924 and 1948, he conveyed 68 parcels around the pond. He was responsible for the quirky lot lines. He set the price. He gave some lots away, sold others. And on some, he let the buyer pay the $400 or $500 sale price over 5 years at 4 or 5% interest. He also wrote into almost every deed a restriction providing that intoxicating liquor could not be used or stored on the property, on penalty of paying him a $50 fine. Most of us who live on the pond have seen that restriction in our chain of title, and it's a certain indicator that Homer once owned the property. People from communities like Medford, Malden, Woburn, Somerville, and Lawrence bought lots to build their weekend cottages. There were enough people around the pond each summer that in 1927 they formed the Foster's Pond Improvement Association, mostly to hold clam bakes and organize water sports. Initially, they didn't show much interest in pitching in to keep up the neighborhood during their brief summer vacation stays. When Homer suggested in 1929 that the group take over care of the dam, the idea went over like a lead balloon. The secretary wrote in the minutes, "This proposal was not considered at all." It took Homer 10 years, but in 1939, he persuaded folks, almost all of the members of the Improvement Association, to form a separate corporation to take the dam off his hands. Only 2 of the organizers actually lived on the pond. The other 14 owned camps they had bought from Homer, but they lived elsewhere. Homer also provided a carrot. In 1940, he turned over almost all of the land he had not sold to the newly formed Foster's Pond Corporation. The FPC, in turn, established a land committee to continue Homer's practice of selling lots for summer camps. The pond reached its apex as a summer community in the 1930s and 40s. Electricity came to the pond in 1941, and use extended into the 50s as well. Much later, in a 1985 decision, the Zoning Board of Appeals looked back on the rise and fall of Foster's Pond camps and described them this way. And in the next few slides, I'm quoting directly from the board. They were of the style and construction typical of campsites in the era when they were erected. There was no insulation, interior walls were unfinished with studding visible. Some had no ceilings except for the roof. There was usually a screened porch facing the water. Toilet facilities were either outhouses or cesspools. The owners generally lived in surrounding towns or near enough so that a trip to the camp for a weekend was not a great problem. The roads servicing the campsites were usually meandering right-of-ways over adjoining properties, which were maintained either by the property owner or the collective action of the people who used the right-of-ways. But then the zoning board wrote, the Foster's Pond area was gradually abandoned as a summer resort community. And as a consequence, many of the camps fell into substantial disrepair through lack of use or periodic maintenance. And that had created a huge dilemma for the zoning board, because by the 60s, as the camps were declining, the town's zoning bylaw required that every house, including camps, have frontage on a public, not a private way. As the zoning board put it, virtually any addition or renovations would require relief from the board. So of course would any new construction. Think about that. Not a single addition, significant renovation, or new house on virtually any property on any of those one-lane, unpaved private roads. Glenwood Road Extension, Pine Tree Lane, Foster's Pond Road, Pomeroy Road, White Oak Drive, or Willard Circle without permission from the zoning board. But here's the kicker. The state zoning law, which is among the most restrictive in the nation, doesn't generally allow for variances from frontage requirements. And as the board was being swamped with applications, it could either enforce the law literally and shut down the upgrading of houses on the pond, or somehow allow a whole community of private ways and deteriorating camps to winterize and modernize. The board essentially took pity on the property owners and preserved Homer's master plan. It embraced a policy that it has followed for 60 years. I pieced together some quotes from a few decisions to summarize the board's position. The Foster's Pond area is unique. It has no public ways. Most, if not all, construction in the area requires one or more variances. Without those variances, the land is unusable for anything other than open space. Without zoning relief, the land would be virtually worthless. Literal enforcement of the law would create hardships. Property owners could not sell or dispose of the lot for its most valuable use if the bylaw is strictly enforced. And so the zoning board decided that the bylaw would not be strictly enforced. Instead, variances in the Foster's Pond neighborhood would be, in the board's word, routinely granted. Routinely doesn't begin to describe the frequency. The zoning board has, since the 1960s, granted dozens and dozens of variances for construction on the lots Homer Foster created. I haven't researched them all, but my best estimate is that the count may be between 80 and 100 variances. Now, I don't want to leave the impression that the zoning board handed out variances like lollipops. By and large, I think they did a fantastic job of preserving the unique feel of the neighborhood. They allowed modern year-round homes to replace the summer camps. And they allowed some new homes to be built on lots that hadn't previously been built on. But as far as I can tell, they only allowed construction on an undeveloped site if the lot met the fundamental requirement of the surrounding zoning district. That is, the lot had to be at least 1 acre. And they didn't allow anyone to create any more undersized lots. In fact, in one 1985 decision, they permitted an owner to replace a camp and its outhouse with a new residence, but only on condition that the 3-acre lot not be subdivided into additional lots. So what would have happened if the zoning board had strictly enforced the bylaw and denied every request for relief? Each lot would have indeed become almost worthless. Then what? Would Homer's former land have been protected? Or would it have been snapped up by a developer like the McGee's? Homer's one-time inheritance offered a bounty of lucrative gravel and alluring views. But after Homer carved it up, a developer would have had to buy from dozens of individual owners. And thanks to the zoning board, individual lots that could have been rendered legally unbuildable skyrocketed in value to the point that no developer could swoop in and scoop them up for a song. As you can see from this 1978 photos, the McGees did quite a job of transforming the Morningside Drive area. And compare these photos. Focus for a moment on the right shoulder and the right wing of the duck, where the McGees were operating. Dug Pond has been created. And it looks like a portion of Foster's Pond has been excised from the duck's shoulder. And the Mill Reservoir has been significantly enlarged, destroying some wetlands in the process. That reshaping of the pond was the work of just one developer. I suspect Homer would have been pleased that between his own efforts and the zoning board's decision, the same didn't happen on the land he had inherited. As I said at the beginning, protection of land around the pond was late in coming, but better late than never. In 2005, the community reshaped the FPC for the 21st century, reorganizing it as a tax-exempt nonprofit open to everyone who values the pond as one of Andover's treasured environmental resources. The articles of organization were rewritten to embrace the broader aims of the organization. The FPC is all volunteer. There are no salaries and just a minuscule overhead. So almost everything you contribute goes to preserving the pond and that grand dam of ours. Thank you to each and every one of you who contributed last year. And if you're not on this list, be sure to get on our 2022 list, which I'll be posting at our website soon. Now, because this is a business meeting, we have some small bits of business to conduct. I promise this won't take long. We have 4 votes to take, and I'm going to ask our Vice President, Marty Rabinowitz, to explain how to cast your vote on Zoom.
Hi, I'm Marty, and I'm the Vice President. You'll find down in the bottom or the top of your screen near the chat button, there should be a button called Reactions. And when Steve or Janet asks for a vote, please go ahead and click yes or no to register your vote. If you are having any trouble with these buttons, you can also simply go like this to the screen. I'll be monitoring everything and watching people's videos as well, just to make sure we count everyone. Thank you.
There are 2 sets of minutes to approve. Both have been posted online so that we don't have to make a lengthier presentation. First, in lieu of written minutes, we put up the entire video of our 2021 meeting online. Second, we posted the minutes of our summer meeting as well. So I want to recognize our secretary, Janet Kenny, for a motion.
Hi, I'm Janet. I move to adopt the minutes of our last 2 meetings.
A motion having been made and seconded, please vote on approving the minutes of both meetings. The ayes have it and the minutes are approved. This treasurer's report was also posted online. And as promised, our treasurer is not going to read it. Is Dave Brown here now? Has he been able to log on? Marty, are you able to see?
I do not see Dave. I don't believe he's been able to join us.
Okay. Dave had a death in the family and is out of town, but he was going to try to make every effort to log in. So in lieu of Dave making this motion, I will move the acceptance of the treasurer's report. So once again, please indicate whether you are for or against accepting the treasurer's report for 2021. The ayes have it, and the treasurer's report is accepted. Under the bylaws, the board of directors consists of 5 directors and 4 officers. The directors are elected for staggered terms of 2 years. I would recognize Janet Kenny again to make a motion.
I nominate for re-election as directors the candidates that now appear on your screen.
Are there any other nominations? Seeing nobody raising their hands to make any, please indicate your vote for or against this slate. The ayes have it, the directors are re-elected. And I would like to thank all of the directors, including David Edelman, Dot Tyler, and Steve Ellis, for the support and wisdom they contribute to the organization. Finally, under the bylaws, officers are elected for a term of 1 year. I turn to Janet again for a motion.
I nominate for re-election as officers the candidates that now appear on your screen.
I should note that all of the officers have served since the FPC was reconstituted, and I want to thank them all for their invaluable contribution and their endurance. Are there any other nominations? Please raise your hand if you wish to make any. Seeing none, I'm going to ask you to indicate whether you're for or against the motion to re-elect these officers. The ayes have it, and the officers are re-elected. And that concludes the formal business meeting. Our featured speaker this evening is Katie Kozikowski. Katie is Andover's animal control officer. And, Marty, you might want to spotlight Katie.
Working on it. Yes, a little bit ahead of me.
Yeah, there we go. Katie is Andover's animal control officer. And as you will discover this evening, that job requires more training and experience than one might imagine. Born and raised in Western Massachusetts, Katie began working with animals in high school. She earned a Bachelor of Science degree with a concentration in animal science from UMass Amherst, while simultaneously working at a fast-paced emergency animal hospital. After graduating, Katie moved to Eastern Massachusetts, where she accepted a position as an adoption counselor, foster program coordinator, and member of the equine rescue team at MSPCA's Nevins Farm. After several ride-alongs with MSPCA law enforcement officers, Katie realized that her true passion was out in the field. In 2015, she started her career as an animal control officer. She has since sat on animal welfare boards, such as the Massachusetts Animal Coalition and the New England Federation of Humane Societies. Before becoming the animal control officer and animal inspector for Andover in February 2021, she served in the same capacity in Arlington and North Andover. And although her day job is consumed with matters involving animals, Katie doesn't leave that focus at the office. Katie enjoys hiking and camping with her rescue dog, Winnie, and snuggling up at home with her rescue cat, Jasmine. So with that, I give you Katie Kozikowski.
Thank you very much, Steve. So I am just going to get up. I'm going to share my screen here. Hang on just a second. All right. Okay. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
That popping up? Okay, perfect. All right, so Steve, thank you very much for asking me to do this. I'm really excited. I love to share stories and pictures and all the fun stuff that I get to do as an animal control officer, especially because a lot of people nowadays don't always see animal control as the good person, especially if you grew up on Disney movies like I did. Usually animal control tends to be the bad guy who kidnaps your dog. So I like to share the good stuff about my job. So So what role does animal control play in a community? So the very most important thing that I think animal control does for a community is community-based education, which is exactly what we're doing here right now too. So I like to go out, I like to talk to people. I don't just give people one-word answer. It's good to know the animals that are in your neighborhood and what you can do to help them keep you safe, keep your animals safe, your children safe, and the wildlife as well. In addition to that, I also do animal rescue. I also am the animal inspector for the town of Andover, which I was in the other 2 towns that I worked in as well. So in terms of animal inspector, I work on disease prevention. So we make sure that dogs are up to date with their rabies vaccinations and everybody's licensed as well. And then last but not least, I do also enforce the town bylaws. By far the most common call that I get as an animal control officer in any town that I've ever worked in has always been the coyote. And I know you guys, you live in a really wooded wildlife type area. And you probably see coyotes quite a lot. A lot of the calls that I get about them, people are really nervous about them because they see them out during the daytime. And they're afraid that they might have rabies or they might be sick because they see them out during the day instead of at night when they usually expect to see them. With coyotes, they actually are crepuscular, which means that generally they're going to come out either really early in the morning, so kind of at dawn, and also at dusk as well. That's going to be the most common times that they're going to hunt, but it's really not abnormal to see them during the day, especially in neighborhoods like ours where there might be more food sources that might be readily available for them, such as trash, or if there's little critters running around or anything like that that are also attracted to trash or bird feeders or anything of the sort like that. With coyotes, their diet does mostly consist of rodents, so it really is really helpful to have them around because they're going to basically dine on the things that can ruin your car, ruin your house, cause electrical problems. And instead of us using poison or snap traps, we have these little animals in the area that can help us with that too. I'm just going to go over a little bit of information about these first 2 animals. In the next few slides will be a bunch of different stories and stuff. So I just want to give you some basic information here. Also with coyotes, a lot of people are concerned that they live in large packs. And they actually don't. What coyotes do are they live with their significant other, so their partner, and also with their young until they're old enough to grow up and go out on their own, which is usually like until November time. And then once November comes, the young will take off on their own and learn to live in their own, find a new partner up by themselves as well. A lot of people are also really concerned about how big they get. And in terms of coyotes that we have in our area, the biggest that a female usually is going to get is about 40 pounds. Males can get a little bit closer to 50, but people will call me with concerns saying there's a coyote as big as my German Shepherd or bigger than my German Shepherd in the backyard. And realistically, usually they're seeing the big ones in the wintertime because their coat really needs to keep them warm. So it can get very, very puffy, basically. So more of what you're seeing is just the coat size opposed to the actual size of the coyote. And then around this time is usually when you're going to start seeing them den. That's when you want to be really careful of your young or your small dogs and making sure that your dogs aren't off leash. They're not approaching a coyote den because coyotes absolutely will make sure that they're defending themselves and they're defending their young. But in terms of coyote attacks on animals, your pets are really more likely, if they're off leash, to be unfortunately killed by a motor vehicle than they would be by a coyote. Coyotes have a lot of food to choose from out there, but a lot of times if they do end up seeing an overweight pudgy dog in a fenced in backyard that can't escape, sometimes it's a little bit easier to get than a speedy rabbit that's running through the woods as well. So you want to make sure you're really keeping an eye on your pets in your yard. And the most important thing that you could do with coyotes and foxes is make sure that you haze them because you don't want to get them comfortable in your backyard. You don't want to get them comfortable around people. You want to make sure that they are they're staying wild. These next 3 photos that I have on here, we actually had to call the environmental police because somebody was illegally hunting on private property. And the person who owned the property actually is a police officer. So he called me first because somebody had ripped down all of his private property, no hunting signs. And this person had his tree stand illegally up on this person's property. And also it looks like they had shot a coyote with an arrow. And that coyote was laying next to their tree stand as well. So I contacted the environmental police. They came out, they took all of this person's stuff. It looks like they were deer hunting back there because they did have different attractants for deer down by the tree stand. So we don't know who it was, but we do have all of their stuff. So if they want to reclaim it, they have to go back to the environmental police to get that, where they're also going to get fined for that as well. But they did leave a little notice on the tree where the tree stand was found. This little guy, the next most common call that I get is for foxes. So same with coyotes as well. Foxes are crepuscular, so morning and night. They also are really awesome rodent control. But a big thing with them, and same with coyotes as well, they're really a lot of times harmed by rodenticide poisoning, which a lot of people don't realize actually has problems more down the food chain rather than just the animals that you're trying to kill with that rodenticide poisoning, such as rats or mice. These guys, like this poor fox right here, ended up consuming probably multiple mice or multiple rats or animals that had consumed rodenticide. And he ended up actually passing away from it, unfortunately. But these guys really are the biggest pest control that we can hope for. And we really don't encourage people to use rat poison or anything of the sort, so we don't end up harming these animals later on as well. Same with these guys. Pups are usually born around April and May. So this time of year, a lot of people will actually end up seeing foxes. I get a lot of calls from them in people's backyards. They're concerned that they're so close to the house. But the reason that they're close to the house is because they actually are having their pups a little bit closer to people to keep them away from predators. So the predators that they have, they feel aren't going to come close to people. Oops, sorry about that. They're not going to come close to people. So foxes will den underneath people's sheds or under their decks. And they'll usually just stay there until their pups are old enough to get off and leave on their own. But if you do have them around your house, absolutely take pictures, because fox pups are by far the cutest animals I have ever seen. Then they're also usually not a threat to people or children. I actually got a phone call today because somebody had seen a fox running around during the daytime and they thought that he might have rabies. He thought that it might end up hurting his children, which seeing an animal during the daytime, again, does not necessarily mean that it's rabid. It just means that it's probably got a better source of food during the daytime, or it could even mean that it's a mom just trying to get away from her pups and get some time on her own. So the one that I just had in the photo here, this is him right here. I transferred him over to New House Wildlife Rescue. In terms of, actually, I'll go back. He's in a little cage right here, but the reason he's in that cage is because I picked him up and I put him in it. The state actually doesn't allow us to set traps for these kind of animals. The only way that we're able to catch them is if we can walk up to them and pick them up, which is what I did with him, or throw a leash around him or a net around him. The reason that we can't set traps is because we don't want to encourage a lot of different animals to go to one heavily baited station and potentially spread disease. So this guy was just such an bad shape, bad condition that I was able to walk right up to him, pick him up by the scruff of the neck and put him in a cage. And as you can see, a normal fox shouldn't be sitting in somebody's arms like that. So that's Jane Newhouse. She's the owner of New House Wildlife Rescue. She took this guy in for me. The first thing she did for him, because we were afraid that he did consume rodenticide, was she gave him a shot of vitamin K, which was hopefully going to counteract the poison that he ate. And then right after that, what she did was she took a sample of his blood and she put it in something to check the clotting time for him. If an animal has consumed rodenticide poisoning, what that poison does is it makes it so that animal's blood cannot clot and they end up bleeding out internally. With him, I think she called me 2 hours later and said that it hadn't clotted. And then she texted me later on that night and it never had clotted either. And unfortunately, later on that evening, this guy ended up passing away, and based on his teeth, he still had young canine teeth. So he was probably about only 6 months old or so when he passed. She did end up sending him out to a lab to see if they could test for rodenticide poisoning, to see if that's actually what it was that had killed him, because she had so many animals coming with the same issues that he was having. and it did come back positive for rodenticide poisoning. This is also another thing that can happen with rodenticide poisoning. This is a fox. Somebody had actually called me. This guy was in Andover, I want to say last summer. Somebody had called me because they saw him on the side of the road and they didn't know what it was. He was actually laying down, and either when they walked by or they drove by, he was popping up his head, and they couldn't tell what he was because, as you can see, he doesn't have any of that really fluffy fur that a fox would have. And I walked up and I disturbed him. He was out there sunning himself, having a good old time. And I disturbed him and he ran away. And I just wanted to make sure that he was still healthy enough to get away from me. Because again, if I can walk up to him, I can get him help. But if he can trot away from me and run away from me, then I have to leave him as it is. So what happens here is if a fox or coyote or another animal consumes rodents that do have rodenticide or have previously eaten rodenticide poisoning, one of them is not necessarily going to be detrimental to that animal that consumes that mouse or rat, but it does lower their immune system. And with these guys, all animals like your dog and everything as well, they'll have these little mites on their body. With these guys, this guy has mange, and it just means that because his immune system is so low, the mange mite was really able to take over. And he's just become so itchy that he's itched all of his fur off. His skin is really thick, and he can't stop itching. So in terms of that, it makes it very, very difficult for him to hunt. So mange doesn't necessarily, it doesn't kill the animal, but the fact that he can't hunt and he can't stay quiet means that he's not going to be able to eat. So usually these kind of animals, you're going to end up seeing a lot closer to people's homes because they go through people's trash. They go for the animals that eat the birdseed that falls on the ground. So it doesn't mean that they're sick because they're hanging around your house. It just means that it's much, much easier for them to find food than it is to stay quiet long enough to hunt that rabbit or to hunt that chipmunk or whatever they're looking for out in the wild that they're not able to get because of the itchiness. I love these guys. These are one of my favorites. Everybody loves these when they're little, and everybody hates them when they're getting into their house. So all these little guys were rescues. I think every single one of them, we ended up, besides the ones on the right in the dumpster, ended up going to a rehab person. The guy in the upper left-hand corner, there was a gentleman who had just moved his boat, and he brought it back to his house and he found 4 baby little raccoons hanging out in there. And unfortunately, because we don't know where mom is, we couldn't reunite them. So we set little traps inside of his boat, caught each one, and we can catch those animals because they are too young to be on their own. And because it's not like they're living in the wild, they were living in this gentleman's boat and like tearing it apart and going to the bathroom all over everything. So it was better for the gentleman and for these animals to be taken out that way. The ones down on the bottom, I believe a tree company had actually found them, and we could not find the mom to reunite them. So they went off to a rehabber too. That scruffy little guy in the middle there was just found all by himself screaming at the bottom of the tree, at the bottom of a tree. Couldn't find any of his siblings, couldn't find his mom, couldn't find anything. So we ended up sending him to a rehabilitator as well. With these guys, it's really important to know that raccoons are really, they're rabies vectors. So that means they are a mammal. They're very common to have rabies, or one of the more common animals to have rabies. So if you do find one, it's really important to make sure that you don't touch them. Don't touch them unless you absolutely have to. And if you do, you have to have some type of thick gloves on or something that's between you and the animal, because if it does bite or scratch you, we automatically are required by law to test that animal for rabies, and we cannot do it while they're alive. And you probably will end up having to go get rabies shots too, which aren't pleasant. So even with these little guys down here, like the 4th picture that's in there, those guys, you don't really have to worry about rabies because they don't have teeth. They don't really have a way to bite you. But even like the young ones, I'll actually show you this one. This one I walked up to because I thought he was so cute and he was all by himself and we couldn't find mom anywhere. And I thought he was going to be just fine for me to pick up. And I don't know if you guys have seen like The Exorcist, but as soon as I got it, like within 2 feet or maybe even 10 feet of this guy, he just went berserk. He wanted to kill me. But he was by himself. He's far too young to be by himself. So I had to pick him up. I tried this thing to reunite him with his mom. where I had a little, it wasn't a laundry basket, but it was similar to a laundry basket, but it was heavy enough where he couldn't knock it over, but not too heavy where mom couldn't flip it over if she wanted to get to him. So we left him out there for a little while just to see if mom would come back. She unfortunately didn't. So we ended up sending him off to a rehabber who ended up having raccoons his age too. So he did much better with them and did not like hanging out with me so much. I have a video on here that I'm actually going to show you. This is just to show you, a lot of people are really concerned that raccoons are really aggressive animals. This guy, I got called when I had first started working in Andover. North Andover didn't have an animal control officer to replace me when I had left. So they asked me if I could come over because somebody had a raccoon inside of one of their buildings. He was sleeping on the top of the stairs and it was it was cold outside. It was snowy outside. It was nice and warm in this building. So I didn't blame him. They left a door open to air it out a little bit. The raccoon came right in, started sleeping on the top of the stairs, and I just walked right up to him. And I didn't corner him. That's a big thing with raccoons and with a lot of other animals too. If you corner them, they will defend themselves. But this guy had a way out. And as you can see, he has had a lot to eat too, because he is quite chunky. And he tries to turn around right here, thinking he can sneak back in.
Go ahead.
And then sees him still behind him. And that's the door that they left open, as you can see. So he just came right in that way and went upstairs and slept where it was nice and toasty warm. So we shut that afterwards, and they didn't have that problem again. Another common call that I get, especially this time of year, is for the eastern cottontail. A lot of people will actually end up finding these when they're mowing their lawn or when they're gardening, or their dog finds them, or their cat comes home with one. And they're so cute. But the most important thing with cottontails is to make sure just don't handle them, don't pick them up, don't move them from their location. They are really fragile animals. They are very difficult to rehab. You have to have a very, very good rehabilitator in order to handle these guys and get them to grow up on their own pretty well. A lot of times when they're about this young, I get calls from people and they're like, I'm not sure what I just found. I found something in my backyard and they look like little naked moles. And I say, oh, do they look like little baby hippos? And they're like, yeah, actually they do. And that's pretty much how I would describe it. And I can tell that they're bunnies. Usually you'll find a nest with bunnies who are kind of all smushed together like this, and you'll find some bunny fur on top of it, maybe some dirt or some grass to try and cover them up a little bit. But bunny nests are really, really shallow. And the thing with bunnies too is mom really only comes back twice a day. It's really early in the morning and really late at night. And the reason for that is that she doesn't want to attract predators to her nest. If she's there more, then foxes, coyotes, any other animals, fishers, anything like that could see her and could see that she's sitting on top of 4, 5, 6, 7 little baby bunnies. So she really wants to keep the focus away from them as much as she can. If you see a nest and you're concerned about it, what you can do to make sure that mom is coming back is keep it completely covered how it is. Take a couple pieces of yarn or even a couple sticks, put it in an X over the top of the nest, and then check on it 24 hours later. If you notice that that X is disturbed, that means that mom's coming back and she's taking care of those babies. If you notice within 24 hours that it has not moved at all, that probably means that those bunnies do need help, and then we'll get them off to a rehabilitator. With these guys, it's just really important that you don't feed them yourself because they really rely on a very specific diet. And if they end up getting like the kitten formula or puppy formula from the store, it can really harm them. They also need to be, their body temperature needs to be a certain degree too before they can eat, because if they are eating when they're cold, it actually can kill them. So you want to be really careful about that stuff. Never feed them. Just contact a rehabilitator as soon as you can. And then a lot of people also see them like this and they'll think that they're out of their nest. They're not supposed to be out of their nest. They need their mom. They need to be cared for. They're lost. Anytime you see a baby bunny that's about the size of a tennis ball, or their ears are straight up like this guy, usually they're totally fine to be off on their own. It only takes about 2 weeks for bunnies to grow up out of their nest. And then they start to hop around. And you'll usually see like 4 or 5 of them. But these guys, if you look at the ones in the middle, they have like a little white mark on their forehead. If you don't see any more white either, that's when you know that they're old enough to be on their own too. And in terms of finding the nest, if you find them when they're little babies, when they're still very young and they're not old enough to be out, it's really, really important not to move the nest, because if you end up moving that even just a foot or a couple inches away from where you find it, mom will not come back. If you touch them by mistake, or if, say, your dog finds one, he's really gentle with them, he doesn't hurt it, and brings it to you, absolutely fine for you to take that bunny and put it back in the nest. Human scent will not deter mom. She does not care. She just wants to care for her bunnies, get out of there, get them grown up, and then be on her way. So don't worry about that at all. Just, it's really important to make sure you don't move the nest. Next on the list is we have this little skunk. It was one of the first phone calls I got when I started becoming the animal control officer for Andover. This guy, the person who had contacted me, was trying to catch a groundhog that was digging holes underneath his, I want to say his shed or his deck. So he said I have a heart trap for him, and he called me because he caught a skunk. Usually I don't help people release animals because they are not supposed to be catching them to begin with. So I say, I'll show you how to get rid of them, but I'm not going to do it for you. Because if you continue to catch animals, it's your responsibility to make sure that you're letting them go. What the store doesn't tell you when you get a have a heart trap is that in Massachusetts, it's actually illegal to relocate animals. So the farthest that this guy could have taken the skunk is to the edge of his property. If he's putting it any farther, he can get fined by the environmental police. Also, anytime you get any type of trap, have a heart trap, anything for an animal, you have to make sure that it has all of your contact information on it, and that that animal does not stay in that cage for longer than 24 hours. Again, you can get very, very large fines from the environmental police for not following those certain standards too. So with this guy, I came over and I showed him how to get him out. With a skunk, as long as their tail can't get up, it cannot spray you, which is the most important thing to know when approaching a skunk. So with him, we were just super quiet. I lifted up, if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a little like metal flap there. We just lifted that up. I put a blanket over the cage so he couldn't see us, and I put him next to the deck so he would have a quick space to go to and hide. So he got out fairly quickly. I don't necessarily love working with adult skunks because I have been sprayed numerous times and it's not pleasant, especially when I go home. My dog likes it, but nobody else does. And if I can ever get a skunk to do anything on his own, which I got him to do in this video, I will 100% do that. This phone call came in because somebody they noticed that there was a skunk that fell into one of their window wells, and their window well was extremely deep. So I asked them if they had a 2x4, and I stuck a 2x4 in there, and I had a banana for my lunch that I hadn't eaten yet. So I took little bits of that banana and lined it up the 2x4, and then he came up on his own. So this way I didn't have to worry about stressing him out. I didn't have to worry about making him angry with me. His tail stayed down the entire time, and I stayed back. And then I just let him end up climbing out all on his own. And I let those people know they had to put some type of covering or something over their window well, because they're going to get lots of animals down there. They had a lot of frogs down there when I looked over too. But this guy, I don't think he ended up falling back in again, but I have been to houses before where they had the same skunk fall back into their window well again, just a little later on down the road. So it's really important with those kind of things, just to make sure that you have them covered up for your safety and for the animal's safety too. This is more of a do as I say, not as I do kind of screen, because I should be wearing gloves in here. But these little guys that I'm holding are baby possums. I'll see if this is a photo from the internet, because I unfortunately don't have any cute pictures of possums for some reason. But what happened with these guys was there was a person that had a Yorkshire Terrier, and the terrier had a really, really high prey drive. He ended up getting out a couple times and chasing wild animals, and he had to be quarantined a few times. This was like, I want to say probably the third time he had gotten out. And he chased a mom possum with her babies attached to her underneath someone's house. He fit under the house too and was just going bananas with them. making all types of noise and just trying to get at them the best he could. So we didn't want the dog to get hurt. We didn't want him to kill all those animals. So what we ended up doing was, since I was the smallest, we got permission from the homeowner, and I went underneath the house to go get him. So you can see all the dirt that was on me from trying to fit in that little hole. But we ended up being able to get the dog out. The mom possum took off, so we unfortunately weren't able to reunite them. But because that dog did have interaction with these little guys, and because they are mammals, we did have to send them out to be rabies tested to make sure that that dog was safe. So that's another really important reason why you want to make sure to keep your pets on leash, because you don't want them interacting with wildlife. This was detrimental for all these poor little possums that we had to send out to be rabies tested. A cool thing about possums, generally, a lot of people, you'll hear they don't get rabies. Usually they're not going to. Their body temperature is so low that it's really uncommon for them to have rabies. But if we do have an interaction with a dog, a cat, or a person, or someone's pet in general, we have to send them out to be rabies tested, because there is no cure for rabies. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe 100%. There's just no other way, unfortunately, to test for rabies besides, unfortunately, having them euthanized and testing that way. But they are really awesome animals to have in your yard. They're very, very, very good tick control. And if you leave your garbage open, you'll probably end up finding one at the bottom of your garbage pan or garbage pail as well. This was a call that I got at the Mass School of Law. The one on the left is my picture. The one on the right is a picture that I got off the internet. But the one on the left, I don't even know how many phone calls came in that day for this guy, but it was a lot. They were concerned because this little fawn was just sitting underneath a lawnmower, and the lawnmower had a tarp over him, but somebody had spotted him and thought that there was something wrong. They had seen an adult deer around the area, didn't seem concerned about the adult deer, but just this guy was by himself. I went out and I checked it out just because we got so many phone calls on it. Usually, for the most part, you really want to leave fawns all by themselves. You don't want to interact with them because it's just going to stress them out. What mothers actually do is, if you look at the photo on the right, they'll leave them there and they'll usually just curl up in a little ball and stay nice and quiet and wait for mom to come back. And the reason for that is that the adult deer are going out, they're looking for food, they're doing whatever they need to do. And if they get chased by a predator, they don't have to worry about their baby falling behind. Their baby is back home and it's nice in a little nice, safe area. So they're not attracting predators to him either. Usually these little guys don't even have a scent to them. So there's nothing that's going to be searching for them. With this one, I went out, I took a look at him. He looked a little bit skinny, but they did say that there was an adult deer nearby. I checked his skin real quick just to make sure he wasn't super dehydrated, and he wasn't. He did have a little bit of a wound on one of his legs, but it wasn't terrible. I contacted the deer biologist for the state just to be safe. I sent him a picture of the wound, and he said, deer doesn't seem dehydrated. We want to leave him where he is, just because it's really difficult to rehab baby deer too. And there's only one person in all of Massachusetts that can rehabilitate them. And realistically, we want to make sure we give that deer every possible chance that we can to stay with his mom. We don't want to take an animal away from their mother, and we don't want to take a baby away from the mother. It's also really important that you do not touch these guys. So I touched him just to make sure that he was okay. But in terms of like people going up to take photos or to do anything else, you really don't want to do that because it's just going to end up stressing the baby out. When you find one, if he's sitting like the one on the right, but he's screaming, he's vocalizing a lot, that's usually when you know that they're in trouble. But if they're just sitting there quietly, like this guy on the left wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. He was trying to get as far underneath that thing as he could to get away from me. But he wasn't screaming like he needed help. He wasn't screaming like he needed his mom. He was doing as he was told, and he was just sitting there waiting for her to come back. These little guys are really fun and really cute. And usually I find them in a sewer drain. But the ones, if you look on the left-hand side in the brown paper bag and in the box, those are the same guys right there. I actually had a state trooper call me because he found him on the side of the road. And unfortunately, the mother duck had been hit by a car and these guys were all just hanging around near her. He didn't know what to do and he panicked, and all he had in his car was a brown paper bag. So he shoved all 10 ducklings into a brown paper bag he called me. We ended up finding a rehabilitator who could take him, and she took them all, thankfully. But he was a trooper, a really good trooper on the side of the road, picking up all these ducklings off the highway. The two that are in the upper right-hand corner, I got called to the IRS building. And you'd think that ducks would be a little bit smarter than this, but for some reason, they always tend to walk directly over the sewer grates, or like the water grates, the drains. And then 2 ducks will fall in, then they'll walk back looking for their little ducklings, and then 2 more will fall in. And you can tell that it's happened because mom, she just sits by the sewer, by the drain, and she's screaming and she's flying around and she's panicking. And when you look down, you see all these little guys just floating in the water down underneath, trying to get her attention. So usually I'll have the DPW come out, they'll help me get the grate off, and then we'll just stick a net in and slowly pick all the ducklings up. And the mom will usually wait pretty close nearby. She had a lot of ducklings with these 2. And she ended up taking off because it was just in a really busy location. It was on, like I said, at the IRS building, but it was right near the road, and she did not want to be there. So with these 2 guys, at the very end, she ended up taking off, and we tried to put them close enough to her where they might be able to like join their little pack, but she was moving too quickly. So we had to take them and bring them to a rehabilitator with other ducklings their age too. And if you look at, I don't know if you can tell so much from this picture, but the first group of photos that I referred to, they're all mallard ducks. That one that I'm holding in my gloved hands is a wood duck. The way that you can actually tell the difference when they're little ducklings is if you look at the mallards, or like this one that's in the brown paper bag, they have a black line that goes from their beak to the back of their eye and then to the back of their head. With a little wood duck, he only has one that starts at the back of his eye and goes back. So he doesn't have a line that connects from his beak to his eye. And this guy was so tiny. Somebody found him at Camp Lorraine. And if you find an animal, try and stay where you are so we can see if we can get him back to their mom. This guy was so young that he still had his little egg tooth on the end of his beak. And what the egg tooth is it helps them break out of their shell. So he was still very, very young. The people who found him brought him to the camp staff at Camp Lorraine. Camp Lorraine then called me, and then I was on the other side of town. So it took me probably about 10, 15 minutes to get down there. And the people did not stay. They did not tell them where they found the duck or anything like that. So we had to send this little guy off to a rehabilitator as well. One of the most common raptor birds that we have here in town are definitely hawks. I get calls about hawks all the time. Usually they're like the guy on the right. If you look at him, he's got something underneath his feet. People will call because they're concerned that they're sitting on the ground for a long time. There must be something wrong with him. And what'll happen is I'll just walk right up to him, try and scare him off. And he's usually got like a rabbit or something small on his feet, and he's just hanging on the ground, waiting to take off again because he probably just expended a whole lot of energy trying to catch his prey. So he's just taking a little break. In terms of other calls that I get for him is this one over on the left-hand side is the red-shouldered hawk. Somebody had found him after he was on the side of the road of, I think he was on the side of 28. And the person who found him picked him up in the blanket that he's standing on and was holding on to him when I got there. And it's really important with any type of raptor bird, don't handle them. They can take your finger off in a second. They can take your finger off with their beak, or if you look at the guy in the middle, if you look at his feet, his nice sharp talons right there, those can dig into your skin and leave a really nasty wound. So if you don't have something thick and it's not an emergency, like this guy's on the side of the road, you don't need to pick him up, don't do it. Just wait for animal control or a rehabilitator to show up because we have the appropriate materials to touch them. We know the safest way to make sure that they're not getting hurt and they're not going to hurt us either. The red-shouldered hawk, that one I actually let sit there for just a little bit. And he ended up taking off. So I think he probably ended up flying up and hitting a car himself. And it kind of knocked him out a little bit. So he ended up taking off. He hung out in a tree. I watched him for a little bit longer and then he flew away. So I wasn't necessarily super concerned about him. The one that was in the middle though, you can see he's holding his foot up. He's just like staring. And he let me get really, really close to him without moving at all. I don't even think he put up a fight when I picked him up. But he, I think, ended up getting hit by a car, and we transferred him over to Tufts Wildlife so they could take a look at him, do x-rays, figure out what was going on with him as well. I love these ones because they're so, so cute. This is a great horned owlet. Somebody had called me because they were at Deer Jump Reservation and they were walking down the path and they looked to their left and this little guy was just sitting on a log. He was sitting on a log. There were dogs going past him. He wasn't flinching. He was just sitting there. So they called me, they were concerned, which they had every single right to be concerned about an owl just sitting there with no mom swooping down. Usually if mom's nearby, they're going to come down and try and scare people or scare animals away from them. And where he was in a really high traffic area, we wanted to make sure he was okay and not going to get attacked by a dog too. So I showed up, I picked him up. He did not have any problem with it all. Before I picked him up, we looked around to see if we could find a nest. This guy is what you would call, what a lot of the rehabbers call branchers. So they're not super young. I'll show you what the younger ones will look like in the next slide. But with this guy, you can tell he's young because he still has those puffy downy feathers that are on him. He doesn't have like those nice, thick, long, flat feathers that an older owl would. But you can tell he's not super young either because his eyes are really clear, they're really bright, and they're really alert. So this guy usually would be out on a branch, learning to fly very soon. He was on the ground. In most cases, if a bird is learning to fly, if you even see like a robin or anything like that, when they boot their babies out of the nest to learn to fly, the mom and dad are still going to be close by. This guy, like I said, we couldn't find anything at all. So I ended up picking him up. I thought there might be something going on with him illness wise. So instead of contacting a rehabilitator, I contacted a wildlife clinic and they ended up taking a look at him. They brought him in, they were about to do x-rays and they noticed that his mouth was filled with blood. And he unfortunately ended up passing away a short time later. They called me back and they said that they believe that he died of rodenticide poisoning too as well, unfortunately. And their guess was that he probably was fed like rats and mice that had previously eaten rodenticide. And that's probably what happened to his siblings, since we weren't able to find them either, as well as the mom. So unfortunately, not all my stories are good outcome stories, but it is really important to know that information and how people have an impact on wildlife too. This is a different kind of owl. This is a barred owl. This is probably a more common one that people see flying around town. The one on the left is a nestling. So if you look at his eyes, he has kind of like a blue shade, like a cataract over his eyes. That's how I know he's a nestling. And because his feathers are still a really light color, there are a lot of really downy feathers too. That guy should not have been on the ground at all. He was on the side of a busy road too, kind of hunched underneath this whatever's going on here, the weeds over here. He was nowhere near a tree that could have had a nest in it. There was no mom flying down in a panic. I sat there for maybe like 20 minutes just seeing if I saw anything flying around at all, and I couldn't. So he was sent off to a rehabilitator. The one on the right, he's likely a brancher. He did not have the like the blue shade on his eyes. His eyes were very clear. His feathers are a little bit darker. But the person who found him, unfortunately, just found him on the trail, had a sweatshirt, picked him up, and then walked out probably a mile with him. So it was really difficult for me to go back and determine exactly where this baby was found. And I couldn't find, again, a mom flying around, couldn't find a nest. So he unfortunately ended up having to go to a rehabilitator as well, which the thing with owls is pretty cool. If I talk to somebody who rehabilitates them often, and if you just take an owl that's about the same age as an owl who's got other nestlings or branchers or anything and just plop them in the nest, the mom does not count. She just feeds every single bird that's in there. So if you add 2 in, she's just going to continuously feed them. Same with ducks actually too. I don't know if anybody ended up seeing that story of a duck a couple of years ago who had, I think like 20 ducklings or something like that following her around the pond. If you just put a duckling by a duck who's got ones about the same age, she'll just take care of them. This is a barred owl in a chimney. Usually I don't do things inside of people's homes. We're not insured to do that kind of thing. And I don't usually have the equipment to get animals out of chimneys. Owls are a lot easier to get out of chimneys than things like raccoons or squirrels that could potentially get out and run all over your house and do a lot of damage. Owls, they can't move their wings, so they can't fly up. So this guy, they just opened the flue, and I looked up and he was just staring right down at me. And all I did was I took a little bit, but I ended up reaching up with a glove, got him out, and the people just opened one of their big windows next to the fireplace, and we were able to release him pretty quickly. And he just hung out on one of these trees, but he ended up getting down in their chimney. I can't remember if they had a cap on their chimney and it was broken, or if they didn't have one. But in Andover, it actually is a bylaw that if you do have a chimney, you are required to have some type of cap on it. So you're not having animals fall down, and you're having things like this happen, like having an owl stuck in there, or worse, having a squirrel or having a raccoon or something like that build a nest or fall down your chimney and having issues from there. This little guy was found on the side of the road. Somebody had called me because he was sitting on the side of the road and he just looked dazed and his tongue was hanging out of his mouth, and they didn't know what was going on with him. With a lot of owls and raptor birds, how they take off is like an airplane. Like they have to go at an angle, not straight up like a turkey would be able to. So if they see something that was hit on the side of the road, so if there was a chipmunk or squirrel or something that was hit, they're on the side of the road, they land on it, grab it, and they try and take off, but they take off at the same time a car is coming. A lot of times they'll slam right into that car. They'll knock themselves out, and they can end up getting kind of like a concussion where their brain will swell too, and they have to go get some type of medication to control that so they don't end up having a problem later. So I picked him up, brought him down to Tufts Wildlife. They don't always call me for releases, but occasionally they do. And when I can go back down to South Grafton to pick him up, I will do that, and I'll come back and release him. So this was a release that we did. And we posted, this is when I was in North Andover, I posted it to our social media page, and a group of kindergartners, I think, ended up watching it and named him Tootsie. So they all wrote little cards and wrote thanks for helping Tootsie. So that's where the name came from. But he was not grateful for us at all, and that's totally fine. This was one of the coolest birds that I have ever found. This again was when I was in North Andover. If you guys know where the new Amazon building is going in, before they had that happen, they were doing some other type of construction, and there was some type of large construction vehicle over there. And early in the morning, one of the construction guys called, and they were like, there's some type of strange bird sitting in one of the vehicles. Can you come take a look at it? So I did, and this is an American kestrel. So kestrels are really known to be in like wide open field areas. So directly next to all of those buildings on the right-hand side, if you're looking at it, is a huge open field. So that's, I mean, he's in the perfect spot for it, but he's very young. If you look on the picture on the right, you can see kind of all those poofy feathers that are on the top of his head. Those are still his down feathers. So he's a fledgling. He did not have mom anywhere nearby. He's probably a little bit younger than a fledgling, because I ended up contacting my my falconer friend, and I asked her if he was okay to be off by himself yet, and she was like, no, absolutely not. Take that guy. He needs help. He's not going to be able to survive at that young of an age. So I ended up contacting another one of my friends who does she does education with raptor birds that can't be re-released out into the wild, to ask her if she knew somebody who might be able to take him so we can get him into rehab. And she ended up getting in contact with the state and had somebody who was working with her to become a falconer. All of this has to be approved by the state because they are federally protected, because he is a raptor. And we ended up transferring this bird to him, and he now hunts with him. And what they do as a falconer is they don't keep them as pets where they're like parrots, where they'll hang on your shoulder or they'll talk to you, hang out with you. They're kept wild, but they still take them out. They hunt for themselves. They do all sorts of actually really, really cool things. If you ever get to see a falconer talk, I would absolutely recommend going to listen to them, because the stuff that they do it's really, really neat. And this guy really won't get much bigger than this either. He was so adorable, but also wanted to kill me. If you look at his eye in the left picture, every time I got close, he tried to bite my finger off. Another bird that I came in contact with, I have a cool little video. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because most of it's me trying to get him in the carrier without hurting him. Is I got a phone call for a blue heron that was on the side of the road, And someone was concerned that he was hit by a car because he wasn't moving his legs. By the time that I got there, he had kind of flopped over to the side and gotten in the water, and the person who called it watched him the whole time, so we knew exactly where he was. So I went down and we watched him, and he was using his wings and he was trying to peck at me, but he just wasn't able to swim. So I went in. This gentleman filmed me going in there.
Yep.
And basically what I'm telling him is that these guys use their beak as a weapon. I did not have any kind of glasses, which I should have. But you'll watch his head. He comes at me multiple times and tries to peck me in the eyes.
Oh, bud.
But that's what they'll do. If you ever get near one of these things, they know somehow just to go right for your eyeballs. So be really, really, really careful. And if you ever see one of these in distress, definitely call somebody to help you.
Good boy. Yeah, if he can't swim, he's bumming, right? Here, you want the blanket? You got it. Yep.
Prisoner blankets also make excellent animal saving blankets because they're nice and thick. And usually when I don't have any of my own comforters or something like that, I'll take a prison blanket, and it's extremely helpful, especially with this guy.
Oh, nice work.
So we got him, I brought him over to the wildlife rehab, or the wildlife clinic. They took x-rays of him to see if maybe he had broken legs, or what had happened to him, to see what they can do to help fix him. And unfortunately, they determined that he ended up having lead poisoning, and he ended up passing away too. The rest of this video is just me trying to get him on the carrier. So I'll skip over the rest of that. This one is also, I guess all my finds are really cool, but if you can't tell right away, this is actually a juvenile bald eagle. He's juvenile because his head is not white yet. He still has the brown feathers that are up there. This is again when I was working in North Andover. We got a phone call from the Lawrence Municipal Airport, and he said there's a big hawk that's in one of our fields. We think he got hit by an airplane. Can you please come down right away and check it out? So I headed right over there. He took me off in his little golf cart so we can go find him. And he was huge. I knew he wasn't a hawk, but I had never seen a juvenile bald eagle before. So I didn't know at first that it was an eagle. If you look down at his foot, you can see a little band that's around there. And that was put on there when he was born. And it's really just like a tag to locate him. So that way, if he ends up injured, or if someone finds him dead or something like that, they can go online and say where they found him, so they know the location that he goes to. And with him, I wish I had taken more pictures. Unfortunately, this is the only photo that I took of the coolest find that I've ever picked up. But I got him into a carrier. Again, this is a raptor bird. He is federally protected. He has to go to somebody who is licensed to treat him. So I drove him down to Tufts Wildlife Clinic. They ended up sedating him. And then right away, they spread his wings out. They had him upside down so they could take x-rays. And what I wasn't able to tell, because I was more frantically just trying to get him the help that he needed. I didn't want to examine him. I didn't want to do anything except get him in the carrier and get him the help that he needed. Once they spread him out, part of his wing was actually cut off, and it was at the airport. So they're assuming it was by an airplane. So they, unfortunately, because of that, they weren't able to save him. But something really cool that they do, I asked him what they end up doing with him afterwards, and they have some type of agreement with a local Indian tribe. And after he's euthanized, what they do is they send them over to the Indian tribe, and they'll reuse all of their feathers, and they'll use every part of his body for whatever they need to, which was cool. So we know he's not, I mean, it's not to say he's going to waste, but he's not going to waste or anything either. Somebody is able to use them, and we were able to get him out of pain too. So he wasn't sitting there with just a half, I guess, cut off wing. This is the first time I've seen one of these guys in person too. Somebody had called me, I can't remember what pond. Oh, Field Pond. Somebody lives on Field Pond. They had given a call in because they said there's this really weird bird. I think they said they thought it was an eagle in my backyard. We don't know what's going on. He's on the ground. They were having like a kid's birthday party or something the next day too. So they were really nervous. They didn't want the kids interacting with the bird. They didn't want the bird being scared by the kids. So I had gone down there and I knew right away it wasn't an eagle. I knew it was an osprey, and he was sitting strange, like a little bit weird with his wings out like that, but he was able to run away from me. He was able to spread all of his wings. He was panicking when I was getting close, all really good things. If you remember the hawk pictures that I showed you, those birds just let me walk right up to them. I knew there was something wrong with them. With this one, he was near the water. It looked like, I don't know if something had tried to go after him because there were a little bit of feathers that were on the ground too, but he was able to move totally fine on his own. So basically what we ended up doing was I had them watch him. If he was still there the next day, or if he looked like he was getting worse, we would have brought him to a rehabber. But realistically, if you think of any animal, if they're being handled by a huge predator, which is basically what we are to every single one of these small animals, you have a huge predator handling you, your stress level is going to shoot way up, which is not good, especially if there's something already going on with you too. If it's something that you can get over on your own in the wild, absolutely 100% go do it. That's going to be the best thing for these animals. But if it's something that needs human intervention, we want to make sure they actually need that before we put them through that really stressful situation for that too. We want to make sure that we're doing more good than harm. This turkey picture on the right is one of my favorite ones to show people because it's so funny, but I'll come to that in a second. The one that's on the left, we had a male turkey that was hanging out in someone's backyard, probably with like, I want to say like 5 or 6 other turkeys too, trotting around, doing his stuff, acting totally fine. But if you look really close at his wing, you can see an arrow popping out of there. So the homeowners called me because they saw that and they were really concerned. So I ran up to him like a little kid running through a flock of seagulls, but I ran up to him to scare him off and see if he was still able to fly away from me, which he 100% was able to do. So I contacted the turkey biologist for Mass Fish and Wildlife. He was very upset about it because somebody should have done a better job if they were turkey hunting with an arrow, and they shouldn't be trying to shoot the turkey right there. But both him and the environmental police agreed that as long as that turkey is still able to move around, still eating, still able to roost and fly away from me, totally fine to be on his own. So that thing, his feathers are so thick and so dense that he probably doesn't feel it. It's probably just stuck in that part of it, but he's able to get around totally fine. So we just kept an eye on him. We left him as he was, and he didn't have any problems whatsoever. The one on the right, however, this is when I was in North Andover. It was one of my very, very first calls. Somebody called 911 because they were panicking because a turkey was in their house. So it was first thing in the morning. I got over there as quickly as I could. And what ended up happening was the turkey was in a tree, and I'm guessing that he saw his reflection in the window as he was coming down from a roost and thought it was another male turkey. You could tell this guy is a male because if you look close to his or on his chest, you can see his beard coming down. So my guess is he saw the reflection, thought it was another male turkey, and smashed right through the window. And this was on the complete opposite side of her house too. So he had gone from one side, and you could just see a trail of feathers and a trail of poop going all the way through her house. And he just perched on this couch. So I said to her, I was like, are you okay if I just take a picture real quick? And she was like, oh my goodness, yeah, absolutely, go ahead. So I took a picture and I grabbed my prisoner blanket and I was talking to him because one of my biggest fears as an animal control officer are birds, because I'm afraid they're going to peck my eyes out like you saw that other bird tried to do. And this is one of the biggest birds I have an interaction with. So I showed up and I was talking to him, and right before I got to him, he urinated all over this person's couch. So I picked him up with a blanket. He let me hold on to him until we got outside. And as soon as we got outside, opened up, and he just took off. So he was 100% fine, did not have any issues from growing through the glass at all. But she unfortunately had to do a lot of cleanup and get a new couch after that too, because it was kind of gross. So usually in like August, beginning of September or so, I get a ton of phone calls for bats, especially because there's a lot of old houses in Andover too. And they can fit anywhere. If you look at the center photo, if you look directly in the middle of it, you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see like a little foot. That's a bat who shoved himself in between the floorboards. And I ended up having to get him out because I had to stick a ruler in there and pop him up and throw a net over him really quickly so we could get him out. These guys, for the most part, bats, a lot of people think that they're the most rabid animal that we potentially could have, which realistically, a raccoon, a skunk, even a house cat is much more likely to have rabies than one of these guys. Rabies is spread through bites. So it's more common for a bigger, more competitive animal to have rabies than it would be for something really small like this. But anytime we find a bat in somebody's house, as long as we can confirm that it did not have any interactions with people, pets, young children, or anybody who can't speak for themselves, or someone who's intoxicated who might not know, any of those times, we release that bat outside and we let them know they should contact usually a bat professional, because they're going to know how to put one-way doors in that person's house. And they're also going to know how to block off areas that bats can get into too. It's really important to know that I want to say it's May to June is when their breeding season is. And if you have bats in your attic, wildlife removal companies are not allowed to remove those bats from your home until breeding season is over. So if you notice that you have bat droppings upstairs, or you're concerned that you might have bats, you want to talk to somebody sooner rather than later so they can put one-way doors up and prevent them from getting in your house. Because if you have one, I usually tell people you probably have more than one, especially if you have an old house and they're able to get somewhere up in the attic. But the summertime is usually when I get phone calls because they've been living in your attic for a long time. And the end of August, if you ever go up to your attic, if it's not finished, it's very, very hot in there. And that's what's happening with them too. They're getting too hot. They can't stay in there. So they're looking for cooler areas to get into. So they're looking for holes that are probably in your ceiling somewhere, and they're getting into your house. And that's when I get the phone call for a bat. And again, if we can confirm that there was no contact, just let it go right outside. But let them know they have to contact a bat professional pretty quickly to make sure they can block off those areas. Snapping turtles, which you'll probably end up seeing soon. It's usually through like May to July that they start to have their nesting season. Usually people will see them crossing the road or going through their gardens or anything of the sort. With snapping turtles, or really any type of turtle, you do not want to move them unless they're in the middle of the road. And if they are in the middle of the road, don't pick them up. These guys will also take your finger off in a second. And I have been scratched by one through a glove, and I have a scar going across my hand. They are extremely strong. They're also very heavy. Like that guy that's right in the middle, he was huge. If you see a snapping turtle, you want to move him to the side of the road that he is going to, or she is going to, because she's probably looking for somewhere to nest. If you end up picking up a snapping turtle and moving it to a different location, you have just made it so much harder for that snapping turtle to get to where they need to go, because she has a route and she is set on that route. So if you move her, she then has to go back to where she was before and continue on her way so she can end up laying her eggs. The one that's in the upper left-hand corner, these people, I think they had like a trash can over her because they didn't know what to do with her. And the turtle ended up scaring her while she was gardening. And I think she actually ended up digging a nest with her feet in her garden and laying her eggs there. But with them, absolutely leave them. They've like that one that's in the middle has probably been around for like 50 plus years. They know what they're doing. They don't need your help. The only time they really ever do is, like I said, if they're in the middle of the road, just move them to the side of the road that they're facing. If you do ever come in contact with a turtle that has been hit by a car or that you know is injured and really needs help, there's this really cool group called the Turtle Rescue League out of Southbridge, Mass. They have this nifty little car and a bunch of really cool volunteers, and they'll drive up here and pick up that turtle for you. If you can bring them down to them, all the better, because they can use all the help that they can get, but they absolutely have a lot of volunteers who are willing to drive all over the place to help these turtles. I haven't been down to their facility, but I've heard it's magnificent. Their web address is over in the left-hand corner if you're ever interested. They also have a really cool Facebook page where they post a lot of information about turtles too. And they've helped me quite a bit with turtles who have been hit by cars or turtles that need help. This is one of the weirdest, I think I might be towards the end of it right now, but this is one of the weirdest finds that I had. This is also in North Andover on Holt Road. They have a dump that's down there. And one of the guys called in a panic, and they were like, we have this giant lizard and we don't know what it is. And he was on a pile of ash that was in one of their areas. And it was an area that I had to like suit up for because I couldn't go in there and breathe in the chemicals that were in there. So I went in, I found him. He's very, very large. I actually didn't know what he was until I brought him to the animal shelter. I brought him over to the MSPCA so we could figure out what he was. And he was a Savannah monitor, brought him there. We cleaned him off really good and then got him heat as quickly as we could because he is cold-blooded. He needed heat to help stay warm. And it must have been somebody who had a pet and threw him out in the trash. And unfortunately, a lot of people do that. But this guy, thankfully, someone saw him. Excuse me. Someone saw him and they called. We were able to get him help, and they ended up transferring him to a reptile specialist too. So they knew exactly how to take care of him. For any questions or anything that we don't get to today, here's all my contact information. So that's my direct line at the police department, as well as my email address, and then my Facebook page too. So if you guys all want to go to my Facebook page and like it and share it, I share a lot of really fun stuff on there, share videos and pictures when I get them too. So I hope this has given you some helpful information. And if you ever have pictures of animals that you guys find by Foster's Pond or anything like that, and you want to send them to me, please do. I love seeing photos and I love seeing wildlife in town too. And if you ever need help just trying to find a rehabilitator or anything like that, absolutely feel free to call me. I'm happy to talk to anybody, even if you just want to chat about wildlife that's down there too. I love my job and I love to talk about it. So do you guys have any questions at all?
So, Katie, this was absolutely fabulous, and I'm sure there are going to be a lot of questions. But in order to keep the momentum of those questions going and not interrupt them, what I'd like to do is move on to the next about 15-minute phase of this, just to get through the reports that I have to make to people about what we're doing on the pond, and then just open up the questions in 15 minutes. So if people do have questions, there are a number of ways of posing them. You can use the chat function to ask questions and do that to everyone so that everyone can see it. And Marty will pick those up and ask them, or you can just raise your hand either virtually or physically, and Marty will try to be on the lookout to unmute you and let you ask the questions out loud if that's the way you want to do it. But if that works for you, Katie, then I'm just going to go on to the next phase of this, and then we'll get back to you in about 15 minutes.
Sure.
So next up, I'm going to summarize how the dam and the pond fared in 2021, let you know what's on the program for this year. That should take no more than, as I say, 15 minutes. Then we'll open the floor for questions for Katie, me, or for comments or wildlife reports. So maintaining our pre-Civil War dam was one of the main reasons for the formation of the corporation. It's a beautiful thing, but the mill owners and Homer Foster found out maintaining it is a challenge. Coming into 2021, we needed to do some significant work on the dam. The 12-foot wide spillway that channels that lovely waterfall cascading over the dam was crumbling, and we faced a state-mandated once every 5 years safety inspection. That concrete spillway was installed by Homer in 1915 when the wooden spillway was replaced. Scott Fumicello, our resident master mason, single-handedly jackhammered out the crumbling concrete from the entire spillway. Then volunteers, excuse me, turned out in May to haul 2 tons of debris across the dam to a waiting trailer. To strengthen the dam's resistance to erosion, volunteers spread 15 tons of crushed rock along the upstream slope, moving much of it in 5-gallon buckets. Meanwhile, Scott rebuilt the spillway with a precision and finesse far surpassing Homer's original. This is the brand new spillway in action as water just began to cascade over it last June. And here is the civil engineer we retained for consultation and inspections of the dam, conducting the inspection last November. It's a thorough process resulting in a 68-page report. The bottom line is that the dam once again received a satisfactory grade, the second highest rating a dam can be given, and as a practical matter, the highest we can hope for for an earthen dam engineered and built before the Civil War. Next is the pond. Managing nuisance vegetation is by far the most expensive undertaking of the corporation year to year. We aim to safeguard the ecological balance of the pond and protect public health. Like a lot of other ponds in Massachusetts, we've had a problem with blue-green algae in recent years. This is a bloom I photographed from my dock in the main pond on July 15th. It's nasty stuff. It's especially bad for kids and pets. We've had to treat the pond with copper sulfate most years since 2012. Last year, for the first time, we contracted directly with a laboratory to analyze water samples that volunteers draw from 3 locations so that we can make an informed decision about when to treat. We treated the pond twice last year. Copper sulfate works. It's relatively cheap. It kills algae, but it doesn't prevent algae, and each treatment lasts for only a short time. The alternative is prevention. The key is to starve the algae of a vital nutrient, usually phosphorus, which is why you're always hearing about using low phosphate this or that, including fertilizers if you have a lawn. Here are some figures for Foster's Pond from estimates in the watershed-based plan we commissioned 5 years ago. Most of the phosphorus flowing into the pond comes from stormwater runoff. That's the blue piece on the pie chart. Now, a major portion of the phosphorus in stormwater runoff can't be controlled. It comes from the decomposition of organic matter in woodlands surrounding the pond. And unless we eliminate them, we can't eliminate the phosphorus runoff. But a significant amount of the phosphorus in stormwater runoff can be controlled. This is the pond's 1.5 square mile watershed outlined in red. It extends as far north as Orchard Street, north of Faith Lutheran Church, as far east as 125, down southwest to Fiorenza Drive and Ashwood Avenue off Andover Street in Wilmington. Within the red lines, all streams, gullies, catch basins, and runoff from storms lead to Foster's Pond. If we could reduce the overall annual phosphorus loading into the pond by just 10%, 25 pounds out of an estimated 255-pound total, our algae problems would be very close to eliminated. But it's not an easy task. There are some things each of us can do. This one-page list is on our website. It's taken from the watershed-based plan. Please download it, print it out, and pin it up. Now, before we started managing the pond, fanwort covered more than half the open water. It's a terrible invasive that smothers native plants. It provides poor habitat for fish and animals. It becomes so dense, it can actually suffocate fish. We're controlling it, but it's a never-ending battle. It's down to infesting about 2% of the pond, but it's almost impossible to eradicate completely. For the last 3 years, we've been going after smaller infestations as they reemerge, using a combination of chemical treatments and hand pulling by professional divers. When an infestation of fanwort gets too dense or is intertwined with lilies, the only effective control is an herbicide. The map shows the limited area where we treated fanwort last year, the Mill Reservoir. On the right is Solitude Lake Management's 16-foot airboat on the way from the launch point in the main pond to the Mill Reservoir last July for the second round of fanwort treatment. We deployed professional divers at the end of August and early September to pull out stands of fanwort one at a time by the roots. It's an alternative to chemical treatment, but plunging into sediment-laced water that is almost instantly blinding is anything but pleasant. And it's delicate work because fragmenting the fragile plants send off pieces that will float away and root elsewhere, just starting new infestation. Divers worked in Doug Pond, the Azalea Drive Basin, the Channel, and the Outlet Cove. They got a lot of it out, but the conditions were grueling, and they ended their work before hitting all the target areas we had identified. Following which, the 30-year dive veteran pictured here, who started the company, announced that he was folding up shop and retiring. Unfortunately, this is not a business that has attracted new blood, and I've struck out looking for a replacement. So we're going to be dependent on chemical control for at least the foreseeable future. We have our lake management consultant undertake a comprehensive vegetation survey every year at 61 consistent data points to gauge the health of the pond and measure the effect of our control efforts. The survey last August, our 14th, found fanwort infestations at the location shown in red or blue on this map. The red dots are annual survey points, the blue where the biologist made additional observations. The survey was conducted before the divers went to work, so a good deal of this fanwort may have been removed successfully. Fanwort is pretty easy to see, and the divers focused on areas where this map now shows the most dots. You'll notice that there's no fanwort in the Mill Reservoir off to the upper right where we treated. Solitude will conduct another survey in late spring or early summer before treating this year to see where fanwort eluded the hand pulling. Most likely target areas will be the Outlet Cove, the Channel, and the Azalea Drive Basin. Spiny naiad is another invasive that when it crops up, we need to treat with a chemical. Like fanwort, it forms a dense monoculture that overcomes native vegetation but doesn't provide habitat for fish or other wildlife. And like fanwort, it spreads easily and is almost impossible to eradicate. The only effective control is chemical treatment. Spiny naiad is too brittle for divers to remove. In 2020, we treated an infested area in the channel. Now, we didn't have to treat last year, but if some emerges this summer, we'll be ready. And we'll treat for blue-green algae this year if there are high algae counts. We'll have volunteers monitoring the pond and taking samples. As to whether we'll need to treat, that's going to depend on heat and precipitation. Monitoring for blue-green algae and figuring out when to treat is much harder than it may sound, and we're amateurs, not experts. The pond may get cloudy and develop surface scum for reasons having nothing to do with blue-green algae, for example, pollen, benign forms of algae, or other organisms. Copper sulfate kills algae on contact but doesn't stay in the water column very long. Treat before the algae come on and you've accomplished nothing. Wait too long and it's too late to prevent a dangerous bloom. Lab tests are expensive, and with our modest budget, we can't afford frequent testing. We need to make judgment calls on when we ship samples to the lab. Our field work is done by volunteers. I'd like to give a shout out to John Lugas, Al Barber, and David Edelman. They shared the work of monitoring the pond, taking samples, and shipping them to the lab. All of the treatments we undertake are performed by our lake management consultant under a permit approved by the state and in accordance with an order of conditions approved by the Andover Conservation Commission. None of the herbicides carry any restrictions on recreational use of the pond, swimming, boating, or fishing, but we close the pond or the affected areas on the day of treatment to minimize the possibility that anyone gets too close to the craft that's applying the chemical or gets run over if our consultant is using an airboat. All of these herbicides are approved for use in public drinking water supplies. The only longer lasting restrictions apply to using pond water for irrigation and sometimes for letting pets drink from the water. Irrigation advisories for this year's fanwort treatment may affect the Outlet Cove, the Channel, the Azalea Drive Basin, and/or Dug Pond. Dicot treatments, which affect irrigation and pets for shoreline properties near the treated water, won't be known until June or July after the pretreatment survey. I try to notify affected residents through our email list, and I put information up on the website and post appropriate streets, mailbox clusters, and public access locations. Finally, I just want to mention hydroraking, which is another component of managing the pond. We hydrorake in the spring when the water is up, letting the rake navigate to hard to reach shorelines. Also, it's too cold to swim, so raking doesn't interfere with recreational uses. We had 12 participants last year and we'll have 6 this year. The rake removes organic matter, which contains nutrients, and nutrient reduction contributes to the health of the pond. But the primary benefit goes to the shoreline owner, so the corporation does not pay for the work. Hydroraking is subject to an annual vote by the Conservation Commission approving the list of participants. We have plenty of opportunities for volunteers to lend a hand. The FPC is only as active and effective as the volunteers who step up. If you'd like to help with water quality observations and have a means of getting around the pond, let me know. If you live on the pond or are a visitor and observe fanwort anywhere, please let me know that. I'll pass the information along to our consultant. And if you live on the pond and spot fanwort in shallow water where you can stand, we have portable barriers you can drop on top of the fanwort to smother it. Just plan on getting wet and muddy. But please don't rake fanwort or try to pull it out yourself. It's fragile, you'll create fragments, and that will spread it. I mentioned the watershed-based plan earlier. Please read the summary on the website. At the end, there's a list of projects that cry out for volunteer leadership. If there's something that appeals to you, please let me know. And if you'd like to contribute time to administrative chores, communications, or anything else we do or you think we should be doing, drop me an email. And now it's time for new business, questions, and comments. Feel free to use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. If you wish to be heard, use the raise hand function or say so on the chat, and Marty will call on you. So the floor is open.
Steve, I'll probably go first, if I may, to read some of the queries that have come in through the chat. These are all queries for Katie. First, Katie, everyone who has queried, and several people who haven't, said thank you so much for a great presentation. It was wonderful. Really a lot of joy and information was gathered. The first question I have is whether residents should be worried about being bitten by a snapping turtle when swimming in our pond.
No, not at all. Snapping turtles, they're really fast. They're really good swimmers too. They're not going to let you get anywhere near them. So the only time you have the chance of getting bit by one is if you're physically trying to pick them up. But swimming, you shouldn't have any worries about that at all.
Great, thank you. The second question is, if you take an animal off of the property of someone, does that animal always have to be killed?
So I legally can't. There's somebody called a problem animal control agent, and they're licensed through the state of Massachusetts. They're different than animal control. They have to go through specific training, and it's specifically with certain wildlife that they handle. So I don't know all of their specific rules, but to the best of my knowledge, yes, because we can't relocate animals in Massachusetts. The most they can do, like say they took a raccoon out of your attic, the most they can move him, again, same with us, excuse me, is just to the edge of your property. And the reason for that is if we move that animal, we could potentially be introducing a whole new area to different diseases that they haven't been around before. So if that raccoon has parasites that you move it one town over that town doesn't have in their raccoon population, you could potentially be doing a lot of harm. That raccoon also now has to fight for food, has to fight for shelter. I tell people it's basically like picking you up and dropping you in a random place in Arizona. You have no money, you have no shelter, you have no food, and you have to figure out how to live that way. So legally, we cannot relocate them. And to the best of my knowledge, if a problem animal control agent takes an animal off of your property, they are required to euthanize them.
Thank you. The next question was, I'm curious how often you find wild, feral, and community cats in Andover.
Actually, I have found more in Andover than I have in any other town that I've worked in. Unfortunately, most of them are usually hit by a car when I get them. There was a couple instances where I've worked with residents who have found feral kittens in their backyard, and we've attempted to trap their mothers too. So there's a couple different places around here that will help with community and feral cats where we'll get them spayed and neutered. So I worked with somebody who was able to catch the kitten. We got an appointment so we can get her spayed. And I think they actually ended up keeping her because she was young enough where they were able to socialize. But I don't get too many calls for like colonies. It's usually when I find a cat who's unneutered with very big cheeks, looks like he's been in a lot of fights on the side of the road after he was hit. I'll reach out to see if it's anybody's cat just to be safe and scan for a microchip, but those are usually what I assume are the feral cats that I pick up.
I have two questions about beavers.
Sure.
One is, can you swim with them? And the other is, do you have concerns about the exploding beaver population in Foster's Pond?
So swimming with them, I've kayaked with them before. And if you get anywhere near them, they smack their tails and let you know that you're coming close because they don't want to be near you. They're not very nice animals with people. They don't like us. So I wouldn't see why you couldn't swim with them though. They're not going to approach you. Same with snapping turtles. They live in the water. They know what to look for. They know what to listen for, and they're very good at swimming. In terms of like the beaver population, I definitely see a lot of beavers all around Andover. In terms of like the damage that they could do, they absolutely could cause a lot of flooding if they are damming certain areas that are by people's houses. I know I have interacted with somebody, I can't remember if she was in Andover or North Andover, who had a lot of beavers in her backyard and conservation area, and her whole backyard was basically getting flooded because of the beavers. But even like problem animal control agents, they can't do anything about beavers either. You have to be specifically licensed, and you have to get a permit through the health department in order to even trap or do anything with beavers in general. So they're kind of like a whole different area. I can't do anything with beavers at all other than help them if they get stuck somewhere or need assistance.
So Katie, let me test with you some of the advice that's been imparted to me, because that's a question that I get quite a bit.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, they're not going to do any, they're not going to cause flooding around Foster's Pond. I mean, that's, Foster's Pond is not like flowing water, but we do, at times I have counted as many as 6 lodges or identifiable beaver burrows around the pond. So we have quite a population. But what I have been told is that beavers are so prolific and so mobile that even if you could possibly hire somebody to trap them all, their numbers would soon be replaced by others that would simply move back in and fill this wonderful void that would have been created by their absence, so that it's kind of a losing game.
Yeah.
And I wonder what your reaction is to that.
So I'm not extremely well versed in beavers, but my guess would be that's probably correct. That's what happens with a lot of animals that find like a nice safe area to live in. Same with coyotes too. If you remove coyotes, they're going to come back and something is going to replace them. So if a beaver is left his area, my guess is that if there is some type of living habitat or something for them that's open, something else is going to take that over pretty quickly too. So again, I can't say for sure, but I would say that's probably correct information that you received.
Thank you. It's Marty again. I'm reading another question. Have you had any interactions with northern water snakes?
Not specifically. Most of the snakes that I have interactions with are milk snakes. And they're usually because somebody thinks it's like a copperhead or a rattlesnake or something like that. But I think every single snake that I've had an interaction with as an animal control officer has always been a milk snake.
There are plenty of water snakes around Foster's Pond, down by the dam on a sunny day in the middle of summer. You may see as many as 4 or 5 of them sunning themselves on the rocks beneath the waterfall. My experience in being around them on the dam is that they certainly don't come after you, and they can be nasty if you get too close to them, and they aren't necessarily shy, but given a chance, they will skitter away.
Yeah, think about that with most snakes though. The only thing that they have is their teeth. They don't have hands, they don't have anything, they just slither away from you. So for the most part, we don't have, besides like Western Massachusetts, where they do have rattlesnakes, we don't really have any poisonous or venomous snakes around here. So as long as you're not grabbing one or stepping on one, you should be totally fine.
There's a bit of a conversation going on the chat concerning the cygnets and swans that we've had in the pond. At one point, we had up to 7. Most of them have died. One question is what animal could be preying on them. We had a particular incident this winter where it appeared that well, actually, I won't go through all the details, but any thoughts on the cygnets getting killed?
Yeah, it could be from bigger raptor birds coming down, like bigger hawks, or if there's eagles or anything like that around there, or if they're on land, it could be from a coyote or a fox too. They're pretty small. They're not super fast when they're really little. And if they're not in the middle of the water, it kind of makes them easy prey for any of the mammals that are on land. But if they are in the middle of the water, it's easy for a big raptor bird to fly down and grab them pretty easily too.
Katie, don't snappers also take them from below?
The small one, I don't know if they do that with geese unless like they're very, very small, but yeah, little ducklings, they will.
On a different topic, you mentioned I can't pronounce it, but rat poisons. Do you have other suggestions for dealing with rodent populations that don't use poison?
So personally, I mean, I know a lot of people don't like it because it's grosser, but snap traps are 100% better. Snap trap is usually going to end something very, very quickly, opposed to consuming poison, having that animal die a slow death, and then being passed on to something else. Most pest control companies that you talk to are probably going to set up something with rodenticide poisoning. I don't know if they're 100% able to do this. I know in Boston, there were companies that were starting to use dry ice. And what they would do if they found rat holes is they'll put dry ice in both sides, and basically the gas that comes off of it will just put the animal to sleep underground. And it'll end up killing them that way. So it's not consuming any poison that's going to be passed on to anything else. So if you do ever hire a pest control company, absolutely ask them what they're going to be doing to get rid of those animals. I believe there also are other traps that they'll electrocute them too. I think those are a lot more expensive, but you can also do things like to help keep them out of your house in general. Not everything is foolproof, but I know there's people that'll say if you plant mint around your house, a lot of little rodents don't like mint, but the downside of that is that mint spreads like wildfire. So if you plant some, you're probably going to have it all over the place. But that otherwise you just have to make sure that you're kind of keeping up with your basements mostly, because that's probably where they're coming in from, or figure out how they're getting into the house and block those areas off too.
Great, thank you. Another question was, are there leeches in the pond?
I don't know, actually. I am not sure.
I can answer that. Yes.
Okay.
But in my experience in the pond, if you are swimming in open water and not touching the bottom, you will never encounter a leech. But if you go wading without a wetsuit in the sediment in the bottom, you won't, I can't say you can count on having a small leech attached to you, but the likelihood is quite high.
Great, thank you. Next one, Katie, is you mentioned hazing of coyotes, and I wonder if you can expand on that a little bit, exactly what one should do if they see a coyote in their yard, for example.
Sure. So a lot of times people will see coyotes just sunning themselves in their backyard. And I'll get calls from because they're concerned, and I'll either tell them what to do or I'll show up and I'll show you how to haze them if you ever have a problem. The best thing to do is literally just walk at them. As long as you're not cornering them, they're going to get up, they're going to run away. And basically you want to look like a big, strong person coming at them. Put your arms out, yell at them, bang your hands together, walk quickly directly in their direction. What that coyote is then going to do is it's going to go a couple hundred yards maybe, and then it's going to turn around and it's going to look at you because it's going to figure out where its safety bubble is, kind of where how far you're going to go and how far it can get to your house without having anything happen to them. So you want to watch where that coyote is going to stop. And then you want to start walking at them with like force, again, making a lot of noise. Get out of here, coyote, get out of here. You're not supposed to be here. Yell at it, clap your hands together. You can, even if you have a hose in your backyard, you can spray a hose in his direction and whatnot too. And then he's going to take off again, but then he's going to do the same thing. He's going to go a couple hundred yards and he's going to turn around and figure out where his bubble is. So the most important thing is to just let them know that they shouldn't be comfortable around people's houses, because coyotes haven't gotten more, like, people think that they're really tough now. They think that they own the city or the town or whatever, but it's really that people don't do anything. People are afraid of them, so they go inside, or people run away from them because they're afraid of the coyotes. So the coyotes have learned that people don't do anything. So they're not tougher or anything. They just kind of don't have anything to worry about. So if you see one, like I said, just walk at it, make some noise, and scare them off. If you actually go onto YouTube and just type in coyote hazing, there's a lot of really, really good videos on there that will show you how to do it too.
Great. I think that's all the questions that I've received in the chat, although I do, oh, excuse me, just no one just came in. Are there coyotes in New England carrying any genetic traits from the northern gray wolf?
So yes, actually the coyotes that we have here are, they're a coy wolf. So they're part eastern coyote, part northern wolf. So that's why they're a little bit bigger than the coyotes that you would see out in the other part of the United States. And if you ever want any more information on that too, if you go to projectcoyote.org, there's a ton of information about them on there. And there's also the Mass representative is John Mangarenas. He was actually in one of my slides in the beginning when I was holding the possums. He does presentations. He did one in Andover, actually via Zoom a couple months ago, where he talked about coyotes and all their information. So if you ever get a chance to go to one of his presentations, he is awesome and knows more about coyotes than I know about anything. He's very knowledgeable.
Wonderful, thank you. Just want to remind everyone that we're taking questions not only for Katie, but if anyone had new business or questions to Steve about the organization or anything else we discussed in the meeting.
Or wildlife sightings that you'd like to share.
And if you think of anything later too, or if anybody wants to email me, absolutely keep my information handy and feel free to do that too.
Well, seeing none on a quick review, I think we're coming to the end of our evening together. First off, I just want to thank you, Katie, for just a fascinating and vibrant display. I think this was just really, really fun, really interesting. I hope you do more of them for other audiences as well, but it's just been a pleasure having you here tonight. So my great thanks to you for your willingness to do this. And I want to thank everyone else who has participated tonight, who has come and shared their evening with us. Thanks for your support of the FPC, your support of the pond, and your support for all of the critters with which we share the pond. So with that, I think it is time to say goodbye, good evening, and again, thank you for joining us for the annual meeting of the Foster's Pond Corporation.
And thanks to you, Steve.